Hi, this is Matt with Sagebrush Coffee. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about how coffee prices get so expensive. And even at a more deep level, it's how does coffee at a producer level get so expensive? So not at the roaster, but back at origin. What dictates price and how does it get expensive? And why are we excited about that? Why do we want coffee to get more expensive? This is kind of a fun topic. I think there's a few key aspects of this that will hopefully be new to a lot of you. And it was really even interesting to me as I was digging in deeper, trying to understand this a little bit better. There are three main aspects of coffee pricing that I want to talk about. The first one I want to look at today is the coffee commodities market. Then I want to spend some time looking at the specialty coffee market. And then I want to briefly discuss auction coffees and kind of what goes into those. And so let's start with the commodities coffee market. If you've heard of this, you can see you can actually trade coffee on the commodities trading portfolios or platforms. And right now I think coffee is going for about $1.30 a pound. But you've never paid $1.30 a pound for coffee. So why is it so cheap? What connects that to the coffee that you buy? Let me talk about that a little bit, but really let me back up and talk about what the commodity market is. So coffee is a soft commodity. It is not something that is required for everyone's life. I know most of us think coffee is required for our life, but the reality is things like grains are required, and so those are considered hard commodities. Even power and some other things are considered hard commodities. Coffee itself is a soft commodity, which means the economics of coffee ties to the current economy, really global, the global economy. And so as things have changed with COVID or whatever affects the global economy, that will directly impact the coffee commodities price. There are a few things about coffee commodities that impact the price. So when you think about a commodity, one of the things that I think should pop in your head first is the lack of a differentiation of goods, meaning there isn't really any branding. When I think about how a lot of things, I think meat is a good example. Meat is an unbranded, no differentiation. So it's a very, very slim margin product. Coffee at the commodity level is the same way. There's no branding. So what does that do to the producers? It kills them. It makes it so they have a really hard time being able to make a living because they don't have anything to differentiate themselves from everyone else. And so coffee, being an undifferentiated good in the commodities market, is the worst case scenario for producers. So for coffee to be traded as a commodity, it has to be traded in huge increments, like 20 tons, so 40,000 pounds, give or take. That is so much coffee that doesn't really go through a lot of the roasters. It doesn't even go through a lot of the different coffee producers all over the country. Because it's an undifferentiated good, there really isn't any quality control around it either. And so it's primarily like the least common denominator coffee. Okay, so I mentioned a minute ago that coffee is currently trading at $1.30 a pound. An interesting little fact is at a global level, at the highest level of summarizing it and averaging it, and you know those numbers aren't really good, the cost to produce coffee is about $1.40 a pound. And so when you look at those two numbers, every single pound right now at the commodities market that's being traded is being sold at a loss. That obviously is terrible for producers. Now that's the law of averages drives that down. But right now, the way that coffee is trading, it's trading at a loss for the producers. And that's something that needs to be resolved. That problem of C market coffee being traded at such a low price so that producers aren't gaining enough money is really where the specialty market of coffee was born. So when you look at specialty coffees, you're talking about coffees that the Specialty Coffee Association of America has put together and defined, and they've created criteria. So it's not necessarily branding the coffees, but it's creating a criteria that says, hey, this coffee is better than the C market coffee. And so they have different criteria. Some of it's cupping, but it's not very high. Some of it's screen size. Some of it has to do with just the number of bad beans in a batch. And there's a lot of things that kind of tie into what makes a specialty coffee a specialty coffee. When it hits that criteria, then it can be traded for more than the C market price. And you have lots of scales within the specialty coffee spectrum. You have just the basic, hey, we know we can trade this because it hits the bare minimum criteria for specialty coffee. And then there's all the way up to this is premium coffee that is being sold directly to roasters. As we're talking about the spectrum of specialty coffee, let's start at the basics. Specialty coffee really gets a cupping score. I want to say it's been several years since I've looked this exact number up, but I want to say it's about 75 or better. That's not good. That's like grocery store, whole beans, worst coffee you can get that's not canned coffee at the minimum. But that still sells for enough so that the farms are making profits. But let's look at that kind of differentiation a little bit. Let's say that a farm can produce 100 pounds of coffee, and 95 pounds of that coffee is sea market coffee. So they're selling that coffee at a loss of 10 cents a pound. How much do they have to sell the 5 remaining pounds that classify as specialty coffee to make up their loss? I believe that number is about $3.50, $3.30 a pound. You can do the math at home. But because of that, they're selling, just to make up that 10 cents a pound cost, they're selling some coffee for nearly 3 times the sea market value. And that's the bare minimum, scenario. As that scenario changes and those economics change, it becomes a sliding scale on a significant level. So when you're a coffee producer, what's your solution? Your solution is to try to produce as much coffee as possible that can be classified as specialty, and then to be on the higher end of that specialty spectrum as you can. I bought specialty coffees before for in the $2.50 a pound range, and that's barely enough to make up for the sea market. And so you don't want, as a producer, to be able to produce that cheap of coffee. You want, as a producer, to be able to produce as much coffee as you can for as high a price as you can to offset it. And all of that is just so that the producers break even. And that's not what we want. So what are some of the other solutions? When we look at, okay, they want to be able to produce as much specialty coffee as possible, and they want that specialty coffee to be segmented. Well, how do they get there? One thing that is actually relatively new to the coffee industry is a feedback loop. Most farmers don't, or producers don't even get an opportunity, or didn't for a long time, get an opportunity to roast their own coffee, see how it's cupping, and understand how to improve their roasting practices and their producing practices so that they can get out of the sea market of coffee production. There are farms, there are producers that can make a profit at $1.30 a pound, but those are such huge farms that they're able to get their costs down to, say, $1.05 a pound, and it's worth it for them. But if you're trying to enter the coffee market as a producer, you're never going to get there. You need to be able to differentiate your product outside of the sea market. And that's where the specialty comes in. And that's where trying to find ways to interact with roasters, to send feedback, to say, hey, even if we're cupping a coffee that we decide not to sell, giving them feedback on why, on things that they can do in the future to be able to help elevate their coffee is a huge part of just our responsibility as coffee roasters. So one more note I want to make about specialty coffee. That 95 pound, 5 pound is a scenario that happens, but probably more likely, you've got farmers that are trying to get into the coffee industry. And so they're not able to even produce 100 pounds or 100 bags of coffee. And really it's measured in bags of coffee, but they're not even able to produce 100 bags of coffee. They may only be able to produce 20 or 30. And so if they sell anything in the sea market, it's just not worth it for them at all. You've got these people coming into this world trying to even market it within the specialty coffee environment so that they can break even. There's significant costs that are associated with the production of coffee. If you think about it, coffee is so heavy. How much does it cost you to ship a brick from Phoenix to New York? A lot of money. Well, now they're shipping hundreds of pounds of coffee from Guatemala, Ethiopia, Yemen, Sumatra, all over the world, and those shipping costs are as much as the cost it is just to produce it. And so your costs start stacking, especially when you start shrinking the quantities. When it's 20 tons, it's one price. When it's 6 bags, it's a whole nother thing. When we talk about some of the Panama coffees that we're buying them in 50-pound boxes, having them shipped from Panama. Like, the shipping alone is a big piece of that puzzle. We need to work around the economics of, we need to make it so that it's worth it for these specialty coffee producers to be able to produce a coffee that they can ship worldwide, that they can make a profit on, that they can make in small quantities. And all of a sudden your price of coffee has just skyrocketed from the $1.30 to things that we're paying here in the US of $15, $20, $30, $40, and there's even, $75 coffees. And that's a lot of the differentiation there. That leads me to the last category. And the last category is really the creme de la creme of coffees, and that is auction coffees. So if I am a coffee producer, my dream scenario is to enter my coffee into a Best of Panama, Best of Colombia, Best of Costa Rica, Best of whatever competition, and then have it win. Because once it wins, it goes to auction. And then the coffee price, the sky's the limit. I've seen coffees go at auction from $7 to $10 to $25 to $75. And I think there was a geisha last year that went for somewhere in the neighborhood of $2,500 a pound per pound. And once you hit that, then everything you produce is elevated. So it's not just that one coffee that you were able to produce and get it going to auction, but now you say, hey, we're this farm, we can produce a coffee that's one of the best of Panama. We're able to sell everything at a baseline of 5 times commodity the C market, 10 times the C market, and all of a sudden you're actually getting real money going back at origin where we want the money to go. Where does Sagebrush Coffee and where do American coffee roasters fit in that? One, we pretty much steer clear of anything related to the C market, although the C market does dictate pricing. It's always kind of a scale on the C market, but we really try to avoid that at all costs. We look at specialty, we sample as many coffees as we can to create the feedback loop the best way we know how, and then we buy the coffees, the best coffees we can get our hands on. And one thing that I do, and I don't know that everyone does this, but ethically or just personally, I never negotiate with the producers on coffee price. If you're a producer, you heard it here. But I never push back when they say this is what we want for our coffee. I might not buy it because it's too expensive, but generally, I think there's a lot of places in our supply chain I can negotiate on. I negotiate like crazy on shipping costs. I negotiate on, web hosting fees. Everything I can, I negotiate on. But when it comes to the money going back to the producers, I just feel like the best possible way is to send as much money to the producers that are creating the best coffees, because at the end of the day, that's just going to enable them to create better and better coffees, and we'll all enjoy and reap the benefits of that. So I hope that helps you guys. I hope that you're a little bit more informed about why we want coffee to get expensive at origin, why we don't really fight back or push back on wanting coffee to be cheaper when it comes from the producers, but we want to try to drive those prices up as possible because we know it's doing so much better for the producers. The goal is to be able to have great products and a feedback loop that helps the coffee be the best we can possibly drink. So if you like this video, if you think it's helpful, go ahead and like and subscribe. Hit the little bell for notifications, and we'll keep producing videos if you guys keep watching them. Thanks.